answers.
It
Okay,
is right there.
there we go. Recording in progress. All right. So we'll wait a couple more minutes. See, there's a couple more unassigned participants I see there. So my guess is that you have joined the Neuroscience because you either love neuroscience or you're afraid of a little afraid of neuroscience. One or the other probably is what motivated you to come today. So I want to reassure you, I am not a neuroscientist. I mean, luckily for me, my youngest daughter is a neuroscientist. So I have this, ability to call her at any moment, which I've done frequently, to get information and to answer questions. So if we come up with some questions today that I don't know the answer to, trust me, I will be contacting Kristen and I will get the answers and see if I can somehow get those forwarded on to you. I know that in order, regardless of which of the presentations you're doing, the certain concepts about the brain do come up. And so your level of comfort in either answering questions that someone in your audience might have, or even if they never ask you another question, but just your confidence in putting a slide up that you're like, okay, I hope nobody asks me a question. So I don't have any slides today. I want to have some conversation and questions, but to start us, I thought I would find out, if I can, from you all, whether or not you have present in your environment right now our most recent curriculum. Shake your head yes or no. Do you have it with you or no? No. So most of you.
Can you show it again? Let me see it.
Yes. It looks like it just says on the front of it. I've got stuff stapled to it. It's just a little
Notebook, yep.
notebook that is what is being used now. Lots of you have been trained quite a while ago, and we didn't have it looking exactly like this. We had a thicker binder, I think. But one of the things that those that are in charge these days, Angie Burleson, whom many of you know very, very much, and Sandy really have listened to all of you to say, okay, what can we do to provide you specifically what you need for a specific audience that you have? Therefore, the creation of this particular manual that has a basic presentation that you could give. It has a module 2 kind of thing, and it has a whole bunch of other individual topics. The reason why they did that is because many of you on this call have said, gee, my audience is pretty sophisticated. They've had some basics. They know what ACEs training is sort of about. They've heard of the ACEs study, but they really want to know more about resilience, for example. So now we have a whole little section on resilience. So one of the little sections that we have now is called Neuroscience. But I wanted to start out in the most general way. The NEAR stands for neuroscience, is the N. The E is for epigenetics. In other words, how much of what is in your body and mine did we sort of inherit? So that's the epigenetics part. The A in the NEAR stands for adverse childhood experiences, the whole ACEs. And then the R stands for resilience. So today, even though that word NEAR is all of those topics, we're not going to talk about resilience very much, and we're not going to talk about ACEs very much. I'd like to focus on the 2 things that I keep hearing confuses people or that makes them a little nervous. So we're going to go way back to some very basic things. I hope it isn't too basic for you, because many of you have heard and have actually been presenting this information. But to go back to the very, very beginning, the ACEs study uncovered that things happen to people in childhood that have ramifications going forward, even though the person may or may not be aware that what happens in their adult, very much adult lives had anything to do with their childhood. But many of us have a suspicion that it probably did. And that's well-founded, because actually the things that happen to us when we're younger, when the brain is first developing, have a significant impact on how the brain functions, not only during childhood, but for a very, very much longer time. So I'm going to go back to some very basic. So how does the human brain actually develop? I'm not going to go into prenatal development because there's a lot that's happening prenatally. But from the moment a child is born, all of us, your children, if you have them, you, your parents, all of us with a brain, develop that brain in exactly the same sequence. It developed in three, actually sort of four, but in three really significant and easy ways to clock, to monitor, to watch. Now that we have the technologies to look inside a brain, we can see that this is exactly as the scientists had predicted it was. So I'm going to turn a little sideways here. First of all, it develops in this sequence. It develops from the back of the brain to the front. In the way back of the brain is the visual cortex. Even though our eyes are up front, the cortex that processes what we're seeing is way back here. It develops really fast. Within 6 months, your little babies in your lives that you see in the shopping cart behind you can see pretty well by 6 months. And they're sitting up already, and they're looking around, and they are processing all of that visual information. And there are modifications that happen a little later, but basically it's all there by 6 months. So 6 months to 25 years. So from here to here, it takes a long time to get to this frontal area of the brain. It's called the frontal cortex. It's where we plan, we organize, we control our impulses. It's a very important thing that we have as adults, hopefully. We didn't have it when we don't have it when we're 5. It's not that this is empty. Trust me, this has got information and connections that are being made constantly, but we don't have control of a lot of our emotional impacts. We don't have control of a lot of our logic and those kinds of things until much later. So back to front is the one way. The second way is inside, it grows outward. The third way is from the bottom up. Now, when we say the bottom up, we're going all the way back into the very brainstem, which is in the back part. If you feel the back part of your neck, you know, right underneath that, you can feel the spinal cord. So that brainstem keeps us alive. It controls our breathing, our heart rate, our temperature regulation, all kinds of important things. It also contains, and this is something that nobody ever taught us until recently, it also contains these regulatory networks. So you say, what is a regulatory network? These are chemicals, neurotransmitters, hormones, and so on, that start really low in the brain, in the brainstem, but they proceed to impact all of our brain. The top of the brainstem then goes into a limbic system, which is in the very, very center, and then it grows out and up into this more planful area. The reason I even bring this up is because stress that happens to all of us every day, we're under stress, either a lot of stress or a little stress or toxic stress. And I'm going to differentiate between those three. These are, by the way, ideas that are already in your curriculum notebook, those little notes, but I'm adding maybe a little more explanation for you on those. The levels of stress that happen in early childhood could be positive stressors. You got to go to school. That's a stressor. particularly if you're 5, 6, 7, you're not used to it. You don't know your teachers. Maybe it's a new school. You don't know where the bathrooms are. I mean, there are little stressors all day long. But as long as those are resolved and you can breathe into them and realize that all you have to do is ask somebody where the bathroom is and they will show you or point to you. Those are stressors that are short-lived and that we learn from. It's very important. I went back to school because I'd been a teacher for a number of years and I wanted to understand why some of my kids, even though I knew they were smart, why were they having so much trouble in school? So anyway, when we're really little, we have those positive stressors, but we also have what we call tolerable stress. Tolerable stress could be something like someone in your family dies and you realize it upsets everybody and everybody is crying and people are not going to work that day and they're canceling all their stuff and they're calling other relatives. That's a very stressful time. It can be tolerable for a young child all the way from birth all the way up to 18. Something like someone dying impacts all of us and it is stressful. But if there are other loving people around, so if you have somebody to mitigate that stress, that's what's tolerable. What you are going to be working with clients, audiences, colleagues, trying to explain ACEs, is that if we go over into that next level of stress, which is toxic stress, those stressors actually don't have the ability, at least in the beginning, of being mitigated by enough things. And what happens is it impacts our immune system, it impacts our ability to learn, it impacts lots of aspects of our life, including maybe our tendency to, instead of drinking water, having a little vodka in here because I need to calm down. I need to tolerate the stress that I'm feeling. Now, where does that stress come from? It comes from chaos. It comes from someone hurting the child, hurting you, hurting me, physically hurting us, emotionally hurting us. So those kinds of stressors change the biology of the brain. What we're talking about is it changes the architecture. The reason I'm making a big deal about this beginning part is that the architecture of the brain changes if there's a lot of prolonged stressors that the child has no control over. And let's face it, when you're 3 years old and someone strikes you, they beat you, you have no control. You can't do anything. And it happened to you, it happened to your mind, it happened to your body. Those kinds of stressors, prolonged anxiety, prolonged poverty that leads into not enough food, no transportation, so there's nobody's able to improve their condition at that time. Those kinds of stressors. There's a slide that you will end up teaching. It's almost in every, I went back last night and looked to say, all right, is this basic information? Do you have to cover it? The answer is pretty much you do, because it's in all of the incarnations of what you would be able to present to an audience. So one is called toxic stress in development. The slide looks like this. It's got a little girl who's, got her head in her hands and she's crumped down on the floor. And it talks about the kinds of things that get impacted. And this your audience will begin to understand. But it impacts your attention span. If you've been hurt in your life, if you've had very stressful things happening, you may tend to become what we call hypervigilant. And good for you, because that's how you stay alive. By being hypervigilant, what it is that your brain, instead of being up here in the cortex, it comes lower into the brain and you start to assess everything for, is it going to hurt me? It's a natural part of our system, and it's a good thing. Little kids that I used to teach in 5th grade, if they were lined up for something and some kid accidentally bumped into another kid, and that kid had been experiencing a lot of toxic stress, he'll turn around and deck this kid behind him. The kid did it by accident. He didn't mean to hurt this person, and he didn't actually hurt him. He just bumped him. So those kinds of overreaction are normal. If you have been in really horrific situations, overreacting keeps you alive. Bob Roten, who you have access on our site, that you could go and you could watch some of Bob Roten's little tutorials, and he goes into great extent to say that our reactivity is normal, it's healthy, and I'm glad we have it. But it doesn't serve us well if we're the only one that is, decking the kids in the line, and that the kid really didn't mean to hurt you in the first place. So we want to help people to learn how to take that helpful, natural, biological response to stress and contain it in ways that are useful for the person. So it impacts what your slide says that you'll end up teaching from. It says it impacts the attention span. That's fine. Because here's a little statement about learning. And it affects the attention span and learning. Emotion drives attention, and attention drives memory. Those three things, those are related. Here is your emotional reactivity. Emotions drive what it is that you pay attention to, and what you pay attention to drives your memory. Kids that I used to teach, if they came from an abusive home and they come into the classroom and they're very dysregulated, by the time they finally can relax, maybe they remember the information from yesterday, or maybe they don't, because it never went in the first place. They weren't paying enough attention. So that's how these things relate to school, for example. So stress relates to school. The next thing that it says, the toxic stress in early development impacts your sense of safety. The kid has to know that part of being hypervigilant is to know that they're not in danger. And then it also impacts relationships. The kid immediately says, I feel safe with you. They don't say it to you, but they feel I'm safe with you or I'm not safe. So knowing about the brain, knowing that it's a good thing that we have this stress response system, we are responding to stress, changes our brain in these ways. Now, I work a lot with Dr. Bruce Perry, and this is his configuration of talking about various states. When I say mental states, you could be awake, that's a mental state, or you could be asleep. That's another mental state. Very different, but it's experienced in the brain. The states that when we are awake are the following. If everything is going really nicely, we can be calm. If things start to need our attention, we go to the next state, which is being alert. Those two states, hopefully you and I go back and forth all day long between being calm and being alert. Alert helps us to learn. You have to be alert when you're driving, for example. You can't just drive really calm and not be aware of things. So calm and alert is just fine. The next state that our brain, the lower parts of our brain, get into next after being alert is being alarmed. Now, most of the kids that you and I know and that we work with who are having difficulties in school or difficulties in behavior at their home or wherever out in the community, wake up most days in the state of alarm. their system is already geared up to expect bad things to happen, to wonder what it's going to be, to wonder how they're going to survive it. They are in a sense of alarm. The next stage or state, I said stage, I meant state. The next state that our brain can go into is fear. And then finally, terror. So the things that happen change our state. And what the reason I go back to the biology and wanting you to know how the brain develops, and that this part is the smart part of the brain, and the brain stem and so on are just really rudimentary but critical parts. And that is because when we are in one of those lower states in our brain, it is physically that the energy that we have is flowing to that part of our brain, not to this part. Sometimes you'll stop a kid who's in the middle of pitching a fit and you'll say, what happened? What's going on with you? What happened? And the kid looks at you, literally, they're not lying. And they say, I don't know. They don't know. That part of their brain that is making sense of the world is not getting any oxygen, no nutrients. It's in some ways sort of shutting down. So when we are trying to talk to an audience about the impact of stress, a lot of people say, oh, you just have to tough it out. Well, if your brain is not getting oxygen to the parts of the brain that make sense of the world, getting tough doesn't help. Getting tough may make you more in a state of arousal and more aggressive. So the understanding of this information, I went back, as I said last night, and I really looked at it to say, is there enough information there to help you when you put up the slide? And not only do I think that it is there, but understanding the architecture of the brain, I think, may help you to understand that just as circumstances change in our life, where the energy is in your brain and in mine shifts. And so you want to do something to get the energy to come back into this part up here, into the cortex. Because as long as all of our energy is in our emotions, or God forbid, in our lowest part of the brain, where it's actually changing our breathing and our heart rate, which you and I know, when really stressful things happen, you can feel in your brain and in your body that things are not okay. So a lot of times I've given lots of talks on ACEs, and usually by the end, people will say, so what can I do about that? You have to change the brain. It's because the brain is where it started. So what things impact the brain to calm it back down? Breathing, for sure. The amount, and therefore a lot of times Sandy or Angie, when we're having our training sessions, or Sang Hoon, we'll talk about breathing, and we take a moment, we say, all right, we're all going to take a breath in, and we hold it for a few minutes, and then we release it. And you say, okay, great. What does that, why are we doing that breathing? It is exactly to stop the pattern of energy use inside our brain. Because when you take that deep breath, what you're doing is you're bringing that oxygen, and the oxygen then gets pumped up to the top parts of our brain. Our brain needs oxygen. It needs the nutrients in order to start to think again. And as long as we are down lower in our brain, we're not going to be able to calm ourselves down. Another thing that can calm us is doing physical activity. Dr. Perry, if you've ever watched any of his videos or heard of who he is, by the way, maybe you haven't heard of him. He has a new book out with Oprah Winfrey called What Happened to You? And it all looks back at early childhood mostly early childhood, or to, and don't get me wrong, it isn't only early childhood that can cause trauma. You know, the kinds of things that we've seen in the news today, you know, the floods, the fires, what happened in Hawaii, that at any age, that is a trauma that will need attention to those who survived it. But in general, thinking back to what Dr. Perry is saying, so breathing is one thing, regulating, taking deep breaths, not breaths up here, but breaths from the belly, which expands our ability to take in more oxygen. That's one of the things that we use. The other thing that we use is walking, getting up out of your chair, walking with a kid. You know, I used to have kids that would be throwing a desk. You know, they're just out of control. They're picking up the stuff and they're throwing it. And I would say to the kid, okay, let's go for a walk. Come with me. And the kid will, and I'm walking really fast up and down the corridors and so on. And finally, and I just keep walking right parallel, right next to the kid. I'm not confronting him. I'm not asking him any questions because he can't answer me. I know he can't answer me. He's not in this part of the brain. He's way low. And so I will say, okay, finally the kid will say, Mrs. Tam, why are you walking so fast? And that's the beginning. That's the beginning of this relational connection that starts to regulate all of us. If you can connect even for a moment with someone, the ability for your brain to react, to say, oh, wow, okay. So the kid asks me the question, why are you walking so fast? And I say, wow, I guess I didn't notice I was walking fast. Of course, I had planned it, but I didn't notice I was walking so fast. Do you want to calm? Shall we just walk a little slower? And the kid will say, yeah. So then we walk a little slower and then we start to talk. So some of the things that calm the brain, breath, walking, connection to another human being, and also being parallel. One of the things that causes stress to all of us is when you think you're not okay and somebody comes right up in your face and they're looking straight at you. We don't like that feeling. It's pretty judgmental. So not doing that and having the ability to walk next to the person or sit next to the person, not confronting a person who's in this moment of stress. And so in your book, it talks about this window of tolerance. You can either be way more aroused than you need to be, or in some cases, kids, adults, we can just shut down. So that window of tolerance is pretty narrow for people who've had a lot of ACEs in their life. They've tried, they've stayed alive. Congratulations. That is the big number one thing. Whatever they did to get to that day, they are with us. So that is a success. So this window of tolerance, though, can shrink pretty small. And some of us can get hyper aroused and we can get really angry really quickly, elevating our heart rate, elevating everything, and being out of control. Or sometimes that same person can shut down. The shutdown in the moment may feel more successful, but neuroscience is showing us that that in and of itself gives us some temporary help, but as a constant state of being withdrawn and just complying with what somebody asks just because you don't want to confront can also get us into trouble. We can tell people, you know, your little kids can say, you know, you say, I need you to clean up your room and, you know, you need to do this today. Do you think you can do that? And the kid goes, yes. And you come back at the end of the day, nothing. And now we're confronting the kid because he lied. He didn't lie. He just told you yes to get you away from where he's at, which is withdrawn. So that window of tolerance, if you ever get questions about it, it shows, and again, so this says window of tolerance, and it can be either hyper aroused or it can be where the child is shutting down. And there isn't a lot of information there. If you get to the point where you're going to be doing a presentation and you say, I need a review on this, we can maybe send you back to this video. Oh, now it says it's time to switch. I didn't see the first message that she sent. I got so involved. Well, you are free to go, I guess, or you're free to stay. It's going to be pretty confusing here for a second while people shuffle around. So all I got to today was talking about brain architecture and a little bit about stress and a little bit about calming that stressor down. Please stay if you want. Please go on to either Sanghun or Kolandra. And I guess we will take a couple of minutes to allow you to shuffle, to go get a drink, walk, use the restroom, whatever, and then come back or go to another session. I wish this had been longer. Sorry.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm going to go ahead. I'm not sure how this switch is taking place exactly, but our schedule says that we can start our second half-hour group at 12:25, actually, is what it says. And so let's see if that's true. If you can either unmute or put on your camera just for a second so that I can see if you're present. Maybe you're still getting a cup of coffee, or maybe you are. Oh, there's Jonathan. Hello. I can see you. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, great. Great. And you pronounce it Marshall?
Marshall, like a seashell.
Oh, Marshall. Thank you. Thank you very much. So we're not sure whether people have made it to the next breakout group or whatever. I don't know. But let's see. Karen, can you give us some indication of whether you're with us? Do you want to go into maybe we can use the chat.
I'm here.
Oh, you
I'm
are
present. Yes.
Okay, great. All right, thanks. And Jennifer?
I'm here.
Okay, great. All right. So even though I can't see it, so this is a small little group. Our last group, were any of you in the last group? No.
No.
Okay. All right. Then we're going to I'm going to go back, and the brief introduction to this topic that I will tell you is that your presence here might be because you don't know very much about the brain or neuroscience or any of these topics of epigenetics. And you know that you're going to have to maybe answer a couple of questions from an audience if you're presenting the slides as they come up. That's one possibility. The other possibility is that you're sort of a brain junkie and you really do love it. And so just having an opportunity to ask questions or to talk about it is just fine. So regardless of which one that is, I will tell you that we have a manual, and some of you who were trained a long time ago, I don't know whether you all have this one. It's just a spiral, and it has, from the table of contents, it tells us that you can really vary the way that your presentation gets put together before the audience comes into the room. You can organize it to, for example, have a heavy emphasis on resilience, or you can have it on a vicarious trauma. You can have it on toxic stress. Whatever, what I will say is that the most common part of trying to understand ACEs does have to do with the brain, because the things that happen to very young children impact the brain as it's growing. So I'm going to take just a couple minutes to talk about how a brain grows and why that architecture is important in understanding what has happened to a child. Dr. Bruce Perry has a new book out with Oprah Winfrey. You may or may not have ever heard of this or him, but it's called What Has Happened to You? What happened to you? And they're talking about what happened to you when you were little. And some of us have pretty clear recollection. Others of us don't remember a lot. And there are some pretty good reasons for that. But first of all, the brain develops, all of our brains. This is how we came into being who we are. It develops in three ways. It develops from the back of the brain to the front, from the inside of the brain growing out, and importantly, from the bottom of the brain going up. And the reason I say importantly is because most of us, when we think of the brain, think of this, gray sort of folded, not so pretty organ. But we don't think of things like brainstem, which has no cognitive power whatsoever. But the brainstem, and I'm going to show you this silly demonstration. They specifically said that they didn't think we were going to be able in these breakout rooms to use any PowerPoint. So I didn't prepare PowerPoints, but I brought this silly example. So this is a pencil. and this is a bagel that got baked in my car, which is great because now it's one item. I can go like this. So the brainstem is the very beginning part of this brain growth from back to front, inside out, and bottom up. And it contains important things like your heart rate, your breathing, your ability to regulate your own temperature. Those kinds of things are here. But what people have never known before neuroscience started really investigating is that also located in the brainstem, and particularly as it goes up into this next section, which is the limbic system. I'll show you the rest of the brain in a second. These are just the bottom two parts, or the middle and the bottom. In the brainstem, there's what we call regulatory networks. These are hormones and neurotransmitters that react and actually, as the brain is growing and once we're adults, stay connected to all the other parts of the brain. Things like dopamine. Dopamine is the feel-good hormone. It emanates from here and spreads throughout the whole brain. When I eat potato chips, I love them. And I take the first one and say, oh man, that tastes good. So then I take the second one, the third one, the fourth one. It causes me to repeat. Dopamine causes us to repeat because we want the same satisfying feeling. So that's in the brainstem. And it goes on up into this limbic system, which is very important. It's dead center in your brain. No matter how you would approach it, it's dead center. And it contains several different structures. One being the amygdala, which is helping us to stay alive. You have actually two, there's one in each hemisphere. And those amygdalas activate when the brain and body sense something dangerous is happening. And so it activates. That's in the limbic system. Also your hippocampus, which is your memory record. Everything that has ever happened to you as you recall it is dependent upon, and you have one in each hemisphere, on the hippocampus. So there's some other structures in here as well, but those two have to do with both memory and behavior, because we see the evidence of it. We don't see the evidence of the thalamus and the hypothalamus as much. So that's the two lowest parts of the brain. I brought with me a brain. The cortex, which is this top part, which is the last part to fully develop. And it doesn't finish, this part up here doesn't fully finish until you're about 25. The back part is pretty much done at 6 months. That's your visual cortex. A little baby can see just as well as you and I can see, probably better, because if I take off these glasses, I can't see very well. But the cortex is actually lots of neural tissue, particularly when you compare it to the amount of tissue in the pencil, the brainstem, or the bagel, which is the limbic system. This is the cortex, and it's 6 layers thick. I've got it in 6 different colors. And what happens is these two form completely by the time a child is 5 years old. They're pretty much done. And they're dead center in the brain. So I just stuck it right into the middle. And now I'm going to crimp this part around it, around that center. So basically the parts of the brain are falling out here, but if I could stuff it all up in, this is the brain right here. And this part that happened birth to 5 is deeply embedded and impacts our ability to regulate ourselves. That is, to get calm when we're upset, to recall information. So it's all of it relates together. But the important thing about understanding this architecture of the brain from the lowest to the highest is that when you were little and something really traumatic happened to you, or a series of traumatic things, you're experiencing toxic stress, long-term abuse from someone and you're too little to do anything about it. You're powerless. So those things that happen to us when we're little can kind of get us stuck at that developmental age at which the brain was supposed to be naturally developing. And so what happens is when we're 25, 35, 45, and something really scary happens, we are processing the present today as if it were the past. Our brain responds in those lower sections that were so busy being formed in birth to 5, even though we're 35. But those parts that were impacted first, and we first experienced fear, terror, anxiety, all of those things didn't have anything with, what are you going to do with it if you're 4 years old and your grandma is your primary caregiver and she dies? You have no control. You get put into the system, you go into foster care, maybe a kith and kin takes you finally, whatever. But those experiences of trauma, i.e. ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, changed your brain at that age. So we are processing the present when we get in a car accident and we're 35 and it's scary and you don't know who to call and somebody else is injured, you think you're injured. And I mean, it's really dramatic for good reason. And your heart rate goes up, your breathing changes, your ability to think. Somebody asks you your phone number, you can't remember it. You can't remember your spouse's phone number. You can't remember anything. What is that about? What it's about is you're not up here in your cortex anymore. Your brain has gone back to the survival parts of your brain, not to the thinking part, not to the associations and remembering telephone numbers, for example. That's up here. And so when you can, and so what is that about? So I have students who ask me, so what if I'm not in my cortex? Does that mean that the rest of the brain doesn't know anything? It knows how to react quickly to a situation. So you might run away. You might, you hear these stories on television where there was a car accident and the person got out of the car and ran. Okay, so you can do something. It's not going to be very smart and it's not in your best interest and all, but that's not where your brain was functioning at that time. We are a closed energy system, right? You only have so much energy on a given day. And when there's more energy going in your brain to one part of the brain, by definition, there's less energy going to the other parts. Does that make sense? So you can't have lots of energy up here in the cortex if a lot of your energy is down trying to breathe and trying to run and trying to, we're not able to think at the same time. So what the resilience part of your training that you will give is talking about, and people are going to be interested in the ACEs. They're going to say, wow, I didn't know anything that happened to me when I was little could impact my likelihood of high blood pressure when I'm old, or cancer, or diabetes. We just didn't know that. We didn't used to know that. We do know that now. But so what most of your audiences are going to do is to say, so tell me, what do I do about this? So the parts of your curriculum that have to do with resilience will give you, I would never teach just this, scary part of the stress response and how the brain is formed and all of that, without having right away a few suggestions to people of things that can calm that activated stress response. It's called the stress response system for a reason, because we've got the stress. How do you respond to it? What do you do to change it, to come back to baseline? So things like breathing. That's the number one first way that people will try to teach you, deep breaths, not from up here, but from down here, taking in a deep breath, holding it for a second, and then exhaling, and then doing it again, and doing it until you start to feel the effects. So I've had students say, I don't like to do that deep breathing stuff. What else can I do? And I say, the other thing that you can do is to get up out of your seat and take a walk. Go walk. Move your body, again, to shift the energy that is consumed now in this lower part, this reactive part of the brain. It's either angry or you're going to pull away. One of the two things you're going to do. And it takes the energy away from that and begins to reorganize where the energy is going. So walking fast to begin with, and then settling down. It will also cause you to change your breathing, which is bringing energy. So it's all about energy. It's bringing energy back into this part, which is the thinking part of the brain. So when you take some classes, hopefully you've gotten some of the suggestions as you took your primary instruction from Sandy and from Sang-Hoon and NG and others. So hopefully you're learning a couple of those things. The breathing, the walking. One of the other things is if you're in this with another person, it's really a good idea to stay present, but to be parallel. So walking with someone, talking, but sitting next to them, taking a drive in your car and they're in the passenger seat. Probably better they're in the driver's seat, you're in the passenger seat. And so you're not confronting more emotion that you are either reading correctly or incorrectly on their face. One of the things that the human brain does not like when we're all upset is we don't like somebody right in our face. We see that as aggression and as judgment. So making sure that wherever you are, that you are parallel with people instead of in this more confrontational way. So I have no idea time-wise where we end up with this session, because I want to go into, we have until 12:55. Okay, we have at least another 10 minutes. So the information about the stress response, I'm going to share with you some information about the state that your brain could be in that it would be in. It's going to be in one of these states that I'm going to describe. There are 5 different states. This comes from the work of Dr. Perry. There's 5 different ways that your brain can be percolating there, depending upon what's happening at the moment. And the biggest difference, well, actually there's 7 states. 6 or 7. You can be awake, that is one state. You can be asleep, that's another state. But within the awake state, you can be sort of at 5 different levels of this reactivity. The first is when you're calm. You're feeling fine, things are going well, you're not over aroused, you're kind of relaxed. The next state that we move into when things start to change a little bit, somebody walks into the room and you alert, you look to see who that is. Oh, hi, how are you? And then maybe you can go back to being calm. Maybe it reminds you that, oh, gee, the time, I better get going. That alert state is where we're starting to get things done in life. So if we're having a great day, we kind of go back and forth in those states between calm and alert. If things start to get concerning, we shift and our energy changes where it goes in our brain. It starts to leave up here and it starts to go deeper into the brain, because you might have to do something to protect yourself. And that protection is your brain gets alarmed about something. You start to, so maybe I'm in this room and I'm nice and calm and I see somebody come in and I say hi and then they leave and I'm going back to calm. And then all of a sudden I smell smoke. I'm like, I am more than alert now. I'm in alarm. I'm like, what's happening? And then I try to check with my colleagues. Do you smell something? What's going on? That's starting to take your brain from up here into that respond area to keep you alive. And what you might decide is, you know what? I don't know where the hell that's coming from, but I'm getting out of here. And so you leave. So, but let's say you can't leave because the exit is blocked. You go to get out the door, you can't get there. It won't open. Now our brain has gone into the next phase, which is fear. So a lot of our kids and adults that we work with, they wake up in the alarm state. Right off the bat in the morning, they open their eyes and they're already like, okay, what bad's going to happen? Who's going to hurt me today? Not cognitively, but emotionally, that's where they are. They're already hyper vigilant about their own safety, which is why we talk about safety all the time. You know, today, Sandy started this by saying, you know, this is a safe space. You can be yourself here. It's okay. You know, that's because the brain needs to know I'm safe. So back to this example of smelling smoke. So now I'm in this state of fear. What's happening in my body is I am no longer thinking great thoughts. I'm no longer thinking about that I have to pick up my kid from school tonight. None of that. This is gone. What I'm doing now in a state of fear is I am sending all of the energy to my body. I'm sending it to my arms, to my legs. I'm either going to run, or I'm going to knock down the door, or I'm going to knock through a window, or I got to do something. And so it's a natural and healthy thing. All of these things that I'm talking about, you have a brain to keep you alive. And this is how the brain shifts where the energy is so that you can stay alive. Now, it doesn't look so great if, like when I used to teach 5th grade and I had a kid get upset about something that a kid said to him, and he picks up the chair and throws it across the room. Now, his body is already, his brain is really, all that energy is low. He's not thinking about anything else except he's angry. He's going to pick up this chair and he's going to throw it across the room. So sometimes our response to the shifts in our state of mind can be helpful to keep us alive, like getting out of a burning building, or it can be detrimental to us. We're going to get hauled down to the principal's office. We're going to, you know, all the stuff, bad stuff that could happen to that kid. So what we're trying to do in the ACEs movement is to bring some understanding to the fact that when a person's biology has been set because of things that happened to them in the past, in these overreactive negative ways, and also the kid, by the time that kid who threw the chair across the room grows up, you know what he might have done? Is he just sort of can't understand that he gets that angry. And so he's figured out that if he has a drink, instead of this being water, it's vodka. And if he can get drunk, he can feel better. He can forget about whatever is bothering him. So society is very judgmental about drinking or drugs or whatever human beings do. They're not doing it, most likely, to get you angry. They are doing it to get themselves more centered, to feel nothing, because they can't deal with what they are feeling, because then they're going to throw a chair across the room. So we're caught in this society between the neuroscience, which has clear understandings of why the stress response works the way it does and how advantageous that is to us, versus when things get derailed along the way and the ACEs score is 9, and the kid has been bounced around from foster home to foster home. He doesn't trust any adult anymore. So, but between all of that happening, and we get very judgmental about this without understanding the biology. So hopefully there's better understanding. There definitely is better understanding available. How much people want to hear, that's another question. So each one of the possibilities, and some of you are have been at this for a long time, and so probably you don't know that there is this new curriculum that's organized according to how you want to organize your talk or your session. We used to have, module 1, module 2, module 3. And after they took module 1, they're supposed to take module 2 and module 3. But their audiences were sometimes saying, you know what? I understand all of the biology part. I want to know what to do about it. And I want to know what is resilience and how does a person become more resilient? So what the organizers in the ACEs movement here in Arizona have done is they have done this table of contents. And so you could tailor your talk, your work that you're doing with your staff or with your community or with your spouse. You can tailor it to these different topics, and neuroscience is one of those. The basic understanding of the brain architecture and the stress response system, I will tell you though, is in the Understanding ACEs Module 1. It's in the neuroscience. It's in toxic stress. It's in toxic stress and resilience. So you pretty much are going to have to say to yourself, okay, this is something, the brain architecture and how energy moves in the body and what we can do about it is something that you want to get more comfortable with. I looked last night at what is available to you in the notes section, and I think they're pretty good. I think the notes are pretty helpful so that when you put up a slide, you don't have to say to yourself, oh God, I hope nobody asks me a question because I have no idea what this whole thing, I couldn't answer it. But you know what? If that does happen to you, you can tell them, I have this friend named Jill. I'm going to email her and she's going to check with her daughter, who is a neuroscientist, and I will get back to you on that. You always have that out. Don't forget, so many of the folks that I have worked with, right before they do a presentation, they're like, oh my God, what if I don't know the answer? And that's okay. Because guess what? The person who asked the question, they definitely don't know the answer. So it's okay, as long as you take information and that you actually do try to get back to them. And so that is something that Sandy and Angie are working really diligently on to try to help you to get to the right person. So I am just seeing a little note from Sandy. Oh, shoot. That says it's time to switch. You're welcome to stay. I will go over some of this again, but I have another different little bit also. You're welcome to stay or welcome to go to one of the other 2 sessions. I hope in some way that this has helped you a little bit, and to know that you have resources, continued resources that will help you to feel more confident with the neuroscience. So thank you. You're welcome to stay. I guess this session ends right now, and you have 5 minutes to either decide to stay, go to the restroom, go get something to drink, not vodka, or maybe vodka, who knows, and then the next session starts at 1 o'clock. So I'll either see you back here in 5 minutes or have a good time in Sanghoon or Quilandra's session, and thank you for coming. Thank you. See you in 5 or not. Hello. I'm checking back in. I see that there's a couple of you here as this last session begins, and I want to welcome you. I want to see, first of all, if you're actually here with us. Mariana, there you are. And
Yeah, I was just talking to Sandy because she thought maybe you had internet problems.
oh, no. I'm back. I'm back. And Maria, thank you very much. And Rachel? Rachel?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, great. And Christy?
I'm here.
Okay, great. All right. So we may have a couple of others join us, maybe not. I hope you've been able to be moving around a little and learning, getting some different perspectives. What I wanted to share with this last group is, so were any of you in my other group? Either of the other two groups? Yes, I thought so. Maria, you were. So Maria, forgive me if I end up, repeating any parts of this. I'm going to try to give some additional information as well. But what I was saying in the last group, and I think it's important, is the reason why we decided to talk about the neuroscience is not to review resilience. That is another talk altogether, as is the ACEs itself. And all of you have been through that training, and you realize the complexity of how it is that you're able to work with your staff or with a community presentation, or just with a very small group, that you at some point have to talk about the physiology of what might be causing this relationship between what happened early in a person's life and their likelihood of various disease processes as an adult. In the beginning, that makes no sense at all to anyone, and it is a big surprise if you're already 55 or 65 and you say, are you kidding me that what happened to me when I was 10 is what might be related to the fact that I now have high blood pressure? How could that be? So you're going to be asked to sort of help people make sense of those two very different parts of life and how that got related. And it got related through our biology. It got related through our brain. And that relationship that exists between what happened early and this likelihood of disease is what you're going to maybe have questions about as you're presenting the information. So with that, I noticed, I was telling the last group, I went back last night and really looked to see, okay, what are people likely to have to know, regardless of which way, if you're going to present on resilience, the resilience curriculum starts with toxic stress. So you got to know about it for that. Module 1, if you choose to do module 1 with a group, it begins with toxic stress. If you do module 2, it begins with another thing, but eventually goes into toxic stress. So the reality is, at some point, we want you to feel comfortable with knowing how the brain developed as part of an explanation of what could possibly be causing this relationship now known as ACEs. And then eventually, what can we do about it, of course? But we're going to talk about just the basic part before that. So one of the slides that you're going to have, and I looked and it's in every single presentation that you would give, is a slide of a little girl humped over with her hands, holding her head and sitting on the floor. And that slide, the title of it says Toxic Stress Early in Development. And that's where your audiences will first begin to say, okay, so you're telling me that when this little girl looks like she's about, I don't know, 6, maybe. So the notes part of it for you says that children who live in a dysregulated state fight, flight, freeze, one of those, or shut down. They're going to have an impact on their attention span, on their ability to learn, on their impact of felt safety, and on their relationships. And it is during that time that you might feel more confident if you understood how the brain develops, that it develops from the back to the front, the inside out, and the bottom up. In our last session, we talked a lot about the bottom up part. And the reason why knowing the architecture of the brain and how it forms is that the brain isn't completely formed, obviously, when a baby is born. The baby has the brain, it has the genetic codes to start those various other parts of the brain to develop, but it's not, obviously, it's not capable of surviving on its own. It depends on other people. So it's during the development of the brain that things can go wrong that have some later implications, therefore those later connections to broad health. So let's talk first about attention span. There's a saying in neuroscience that emotion drives attention and that attention drives memory. So let's unpack that a little bit. So the emotional part of your brain, which is the centermost part, in the last group I showed a little handheld sample because we were thinking we weren't going to show slides during this time. But this pencil bagel, which I showed to the last group, I didn't show it to the first group. So anyway, this is the brain stem, breathing, heart rate, temperature regulation, all of those things to keep you alive. You have to have this functioning or nothing else works. So, but in here is what neuroscience is recently sharing with us, that there are neurochemicals that are in this part that get released and have connections, have circuitry that goes throughout the entire brain, up into the limbic system, which is the emotional coding of information that comes in. It's emotional processing, it's memory. Memory is stored in the centermost part of your brain and in mine. That center part has to be working pretty well, or we don't learn as easily. And certainly we might learn it, but then we can't remember it when we need it. So that center part is very important. The cortex, which I was showing in the last group, this is a silly thing. It's got all of these. Look at the amount of neural tissue here. This represents the cortex. The cortex has actually 6 layers of different neurons that together function as the cortex, which is where we think and we remember, we have our language, we have our first language, we know math, science, all the stuff we learned in school. It's all in your cortex. And the cortex relates to one another. But these very important regulatory networks that start way down here project through the entire brain. So what that means is when stress gets unbelievably hard for us. Now there's different levels of stress. We all have stress every day. We manage it or we don't manage it so well. We can tolerate certain things if we have people that we can help us through that tolerable kinds of stress, because we know somebody cares about us, somebody's concerned about us, somebody loves us. That can help. If we get into that next level, which is called toxic stress, this action here gets really strong, guys. These regulatory networks catch fire and bam, they project throughout the whole brain to alert us to the fact that we could be in trouble, that we could be severely hurt, we could be damaged. And so that process, that physiological process is number one, it's common for all humans. Number two, it's very helpful if you actually are in a situation where your brain needs to make you act really quickly. If you need to, in our last group, we were talking about being in a building and you realize that the building's on fire. you better be able to get out of that building to stay alive. So that kind of necessity is why the brain, this is a wonderful way that it works. It saves us in many instances. So we don't want to say, oh, well, we should never react to stress. You have to react to stress and toxic stress if you're going to stay alive. But when that is prolonged and there's really no escaping it, you can't run away, you can't hide, it's a part of life. What happens is we start adapting our behavior. Our behavior goes from something predictable to something very unpredictable, or something that is just strictly reactive. And that's because of where the energy is going in the brain. We are no longer getting sufficient energy here in our cortex, but we have all of that energy in those lower parts of the brain to help us to live. I used to be a 5th grade teacher. I wanted to go back and get my PhD in learning because I wanted to understand the brain better so that I would understand why smart kids who I knew could figure out an answer to a problem on some days, but other days, if they were really dysregulated and they were acting out and they were futzing and they were hitting their next door neighbor and they were doing all kinds of things, they were not able to do well in school. They were failing. I wanted to understand that. I now understand that it has a great deal to do with the actual structure and how the energy shifts according to the mental state that we are in. The work of Dr. Bruce Perry says something, one of the very first videos that I show people when I'm able to teach his work is a video where he's describing brain basics, and he says something that is really critical. When we're older and something happens, we are processing the present day, today, Thursday, as if it were the past. So if what is happening that is stressful today triggers us, we go all the way back to the developing brain. This all develops birth to 5. The rest of it, the stuff is going on in here, but it's certainly not done. It's never done. The cortex, as you can see from the amount of neural tissue, I mean, it's endless what we can continue to learn. But this part, pretty much done birth to 5. So if some traumatic event happened to a kid who was 2 or 3 years old, that memory of that incident and something over here, some cue happens when you're 35, and suddenly your brain is processing what is happening at age 35 as if you were 2 or 3 years old. It explains our very childish behaviors sometimes because we are going back in time. And here's an interesting thing that I learned a couple of years ago, but man, is it helpful to me in trying to understand people and their behaviors. The part of the brain that processes time is up here in the cortex. So if energy is leaving your cortex and you're not able to think, if you're running out of a burning building, you are not thinking about picking up your kid that afternoon. You're not thinking about what you're going to make for dinner. You are just in survival mode. And when you are in survival mode, that sense of time, which is located sort of back behind your eyebrows, back in here somewhere, is in the cortex. If you've got no energy going there, no wonder people, when they're really stressed out, they don't know how long some horrific event has been going on. Was it 10 minutes? Did it last an hour? We don't know, because our sense of time is in the neocortex. It's not in these lower areas. So no wonder if I'm 35 and something happens and I start acting and responding as if I'm a little kid, hitting things and laying on the floor crying. That's what a 2 or 3 year old does, unless It's a 35-year-old who is really at they're in terror. They're no longer calm, they're not reflective, they're not even alert. They are strictly in survival mode. So in that way, understanding for your teaching, understanding how that energy shifts around in the brain depending upon circumstances, I think will help you to answer a couple of questions that someone might ask you when you put up a slide. Some of the other slides, I'm sorry that we probably should have had you bring your curriculum with you when you came to this training, but at any rate, it's in all of the information about this toxic stress. And I think that I think it's wise for you to take a few minutes to differentiate between toxic stress, unremitting, chaotic, long-term, serious, difficult stress, punishment, abuse, extreme poverty, lack of housing, you're homeless and no funds for food. I mean, that is a way different kind of stress than what happened to some of us this morning with connectivity, because Cox had a big outage in the area where I lived. I'm in my friend's house. I had to throw everything into a bag and run over to my friend's house to be able to get on. That was stressful, but it's not going to change the course of my life. It's not going to change my health. And so knowing the difference between everyday positive stress, we learn from that. What I've learned, that one other time something similar happened. So I knew that I had a little suitcase kind of thing nearby. I learned that from the last time I had something like that happen. So positive stress can increase our learning. Tolerable stress can increase our emotional connections to people. If we have people in our lives when we have a very stressful occurrence, if we have people, relationships in our lives who can help us to mitigate that horrendous, just want to lay down on the floor and cry and scream. If we have people who can help us in that relationship, then that stress is tolerable. What the science is showing us is where we need to do our most serious work is trying to lessen the number of days, hours, minutes that any human is in toxic stress. So if we can do that, I mean, obviously that is the goal. And how we get there is by helping people learn to regulate. Some of the things when you went through your training, I'm sure that they had you go through some breathing exercises, taking deep breaths way down in your lower tummy area almost, instead of when we're stressed out, we tend to breathe up here. We want to get deep, and for deep breaths, long breaths, that what it does is it shifts where the energy is going in your body. It brings more oxygen to this part, which is slowly shutting down during these really critical, stressful times. The other thing that we can do is to get up and move, is to walk. Again, that shifts where the energy is in our body. And it can help to mitigate that, that need for regulation. Walking itself is regulating because it has a beat to it. If you get walking down the street, pretty soon you're kind of, all parts of your body are kind of jiving along with that rhythm. We know that rhythm is relaxing to the brain. And the reason why that is because it is reminiscent of when we were in our mom's tummy, safe, warm, fed, listening to that heart rate. And it went on forever. I mean, the heart beats. That's what a heart does. Pregnant, after pregnancy. And so anything that replicates that sort of continuous rhythm helps to relax us. because it reminds those lowest parts of the brain that there are times in our life where it's going to be better. It's going to be safe. It's going to be okay. So don't be concerned if I can't really think of any one of our sessions here that we have organized for you that doesn't require some knowledge of our brain's response to stress. And the fact that I think what I will do is end this session with something that I used to share with moms and dads who have brand new babies. These babies in a prevention mode I wasn't going to talk about stress and all those kinds of things with brand new parents, but I wanted them to know a couple of things about the brain. Number one, the brain, I'm going to give you 6 things. The brain is an adaptation organ. We are designed to learn. We are designed to change. By activating parts of our brain that connect together, we learn, and that's adaptation. And so that's kind of the general picture that helps us to stay alive. That's survival response. The next thing is that the brain is a pattern-seeking organ. When any baby is born, and you and I today, we are looking for a pattern in something. And you say, well, why do we do that? Why is the brain designed to look for a pattern? And again, it goes back to survival. If you can figure out what comes next, you have just increased the chances that you will stay alive. So you're looking for a pattern. You're looking from the very beginning. If you're hungry and you're a baby, you're 2 months old, if you cry, maybe somebody's going to come and pick you up, and you begin to learn. And by 3 months old, you've learned, okay, I don't actually have to cry a lot. I just have to go, and somebody will come. That's a pattern that you have in your brain as this tiny infant. You have figured out, I can do this and that will happen. That's a pattern. So the brain is a pattern-seeking organ. Throughout our lives, music is a pattern. Reading is a pattern. A lot of our relationships are built on different patterns. And our brain likes that, seeks it. You have almost like no choice. Your brain is going to look for pattern. The other thing that the brain is, so the third thing is it's a novelty-seeking organ. In order to stay alive, you have to experiment. You have to say, it's like the reason why a little kid puts everything in their mouth. They want to know, can I eat this? Or is it going to eat me? That novelty is testing. What is this and what does it do? How can it help me? What is this and what does it do and how can it help me? And you go through, if you put a little baby in the middle of a room and have a bunch of just objects, some toys, some just, I don't know, a stool or something, the baby will eventually investigate every single thing in that room. And they didn't do it mindfully. They didn't say, oh, I know how I'm going to entertain myself today. I'm going to check out everything in this room. It is how the brain is organized. It is organized to seek novelty. It's the reason why we as human beings learn any new skill, you watch people play in an orchestra and you're 12 and you think, you know what? I wonder if I should do that. I wonder what that feels like to play a violin. I wonder what this is like. I wonder. So all of that novelty continues throughout our lives. The next thing that the brain is a pleasure-seeking organ. Way down deep here in this area of the brain stem, there's a chemical, a neurotransmitter, a hormone, whatever you want to call it, called dopamine. And that's the feel-good hormone that is released the minute your brain recognizes that your physiology feels good. Any particular kind of food that you really like or an experience that you enjoy, your brain says, oh, that felt great. I want to do that again. And so we keep doing the thing that we like. The reason a little kid will bring you a book that you have read to them 1,000 times is that it gives them pleasure because they already know the answers that are in the book. They know what the next page is, and that feels good. So it feels good on both the pattern and on the pleasure. The next thing is that the brain is an energy conserving organ. We are not going to expend all of our energy every single day because the brain already knows, because it's been around for eons, I better save some energy in case I need to run out of here. I better save some energy so that I can survive, because you never know what's going to happen. So the brain automatically causes us to conserve some energy every day. And it's why we feel so horrible when we say to ourselves, I'm done. I'm done. I can't do another thing. You could if you needed to. And that's because your brain has saved that energy so that you could run out, leave, fight, do whatever you needed to do. And the last thing is that it is a meaning-seeking organ. We want to know why. It's built into us. It's built into our brain architecture to seek meaning. It starts with simple cause and effect. It starts with associative learning when you're a baby, and they're calling us back and they're making us leave. So anyway, I made it through all 6. I could have elaborated more on that last one, but it looks like they're asking us to come back to this, to the center group. I hope in some way that this helped you a little bit to project what you're going to have a little bit of knowledge about before you can do any of our trainings. So thank you guys. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Okay, bye. Okay,
Hello there.
hello there. It says it's still recording. I was wondering whether I bounced back into this group if it was still recording. So I hope that it's saved somewhere. So
Yeah, it should save on, let me look, because it's interesting that it's still recording when you come back in from the breakout room.
yeah, but maybe it's because I'm back with you. Let's hope. But if
Yeah.
everybody was supposed to come back, I thought, okay, I guess that means we're all supposed to come back.
Yeah. Jill, why don't you go on and stop recording? Because it looks like because I can't stop the recording.
Do you want me to stop the recording?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, you do. Hmm.
Because then what it'll do is continue to record this main session.
Okay. So if I stop the recording, it'll still be in there, right?
Yep. It'll
Okay.
save to your computer.
Okay.